Good morning. I hope the new year is off to a good start for all of you, and I'm glad that you could join us for this important topic. I'm Dan Kuntz, MOCPA's Senior Director of Professional Development. What we have experienced the past few months almost seems surreal, and as CPAs, many of you have had to maintain focus on the viability of your organization and those of our clients, as well as the long-term impact on our business community. But throughout all of this, we can't lose sight of our shared humanity and the impact that we are each personally feeling. As we've gathered virtually with members in learning events, meetings, and roundtables, a common theme in discussion is the mental toll the past few months have taken on everyone. I can't emphasize enough the importance of focusing on not only your own mental well-being, but that of your colleagues during these times. We know that most of you are headed back into busy season with not much of a break, if any, from last year's extended session. While we know there are brighter days around the corner, many people are still feeling the impact of this past year, whether a colleague, client, or family member. Please be aware and encourage work-life balance for your team and practice it for yourself. Even in the thick of deadlines, take time to listen and be there for those around you. And likewise for yourself. It is okay to lean on others. If you have not already, I encourage you to visit the Mental Health Resources for CPAs section on our website. There, you will find recordings of our previous programs, articles, and other related resources. Now, today's program will cover such topics as learning how to define positive psychology, the benefits of positive psychology and happiness, and how to really understand and apply tips for practicing both positive psychology and happiness. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Diane Andrea. Diane is the health management consultant for Marsh McLennan Agency and has been with the firm since 2011. Residing in the industry for over 25 years, Diane is responsible for assisting clients with health and well-being initiatives at the workplace. She is an experienced public speaker and has served as an expert for the media through TV, radio, and print on matters related to nutrition. Internally at MMA, Diane assists employees with individual wellness goals and works alongside the HR department on wellness initiatives, which has earned the firm several worksite wellness recognition awards. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in hospital dietetics and an MBA degree in management and strategy. She is a registered and licensed dietitian. And she is also certified in the workplace wellness compliance and is also a certified mental health first aid instructor. In her free time, she enjoys being outdoors, having coffee with friends and family. Diane, thank you so much for being with us today and presenting such an important topic. I know I saw you about 10 minutes ago. We had a quick internet issue, so we're gonna have to just listen to Diane today. So Diane, you can turn it over to you and you have the stage.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so bummed that my internet had just decided to go out. I think I'm going to blame it on the weather. I don't know, but I'm really happy to be here with the Missouri Society of CPAs and be able to talk about positivity and happiness in 2021. And I loved your introduction and your explanation and just reminding all of us to really just take care of ourselves all times, especially during now when we have a lot of things going on. So on the next slide, you'll see that if you were to go ahead and Google wellness, you'd probably, if you Google positive psychology, I've got all these other things coming on my computer here, I apologize. You'd probably find a lot of great definitions and information, and you most likely see the name Dr. Martin Seligman, and he's often referred to as the founding father of positive psychology. So he was president of the American Psychological Association back in 1998, and he really began that whole notion of focusing on positive aspects of life as opposed to all of the negative aspects of mental health. And the next slide is the definition according to Psychology Today. So they deem positive psychology as a branch of psychology that's focused on the character strengths and behaviors that allow individuals to build a life of meaning and purpose, to move beyond surviving to flourishing. You might see it maybe said as a scientific study of what makes life worth living, or perhaps focusing on strengths and weaknesses. But I really like this definition for a couple reasons. Number one, I really like that word, that kind of saying meaning and purpose and that word purpose specifically. So as I talk with clients as a health management consultant, and we talk about how do we have that engaged workforce, what does that look like? Those individuals who come to work with that purpose and they know what their purpose is and they're using their strengths, et cetera, in their job, they tend to be your more engaged individuals. The ones we really like, we like to keep them around. So I really like that purpose. And I also like that word flourishing, because to me, I think of a plant that's blooming, right? So it has the right soil, it has the right moisture level, it's got the right exposure. And so humans are kind of the same way, right? There's certain things that go into our well-being to help us to flourish. So the next slide, you'll see about a lot of the different, kind of think of these as the ingredients, right, that go together for a meaningful, positive life. And positive psychology field really spends most of its time exploring these topics. So you'll see, it looks at how people cultivate happiness, how we cultivate resilience and strength. So these are all studied in order to help learn how people really live their best lives. I spend a lot of my time talking with clients about employee well-being, so we look at that physical well-being, we look at the social well-being, the mental well-being of their employee population, and financial well-being. So we really are striving to make sure that employees are meeting their purpose in their relationship. So at the workplace. On the next slide, then, we'll look at some of the benefits. So is it just a good thing? Are there actual benefits to positive psychology? And this is from the Mayo Clinic. They talk about how these health benefits of positive thinking may really provide some of these different aspects. So you'll see things such as, helping individuals to maintain their levels of stress or to have better coping skills, or even you'll see some benefits physically from being able to have more of that positive psychology and thinking about that. And then on the next slide, this is from Sonia Lubomirsky at the University of California. And she looks at happiness. And these are some of the benefits that she found in her research to happiness. And you can see some of those similar benefits. So lower stress levels, less pain. So we've got that physical well-being part of that. You also see things like larger social rewards. So having more friends and stronger social support, those richer social interactions. You'll see higher income. But of course, we do know there is a point at which income does contribute to an individual's well-being, right? So there is that point where we want to make sure that individual is financially secure, but that necessarily, higher income doesn't necessarily mean that someone who has higher income has more happiness, right? And because really studies show millionaires, they don't necessarily have a higher sense of well-being than those who are under them. So we'll look at the next slide, and this just kind of shows us that if we would really make sense, right, that if we just focused on the positive aspects of life, things would be great. But unfortunately, our brain's really not wired that way naturally. So our brain is pretty much wired for survival. We learn from pain. You touch a hot stove, you get burned, you don't touch the hot stove again. And we have cortisol that releases. And that is kind of known as that stress hormone. But cortisol is really important, especially with that fight or flight syndrome. So let's say you're in the middle of the field and a saber-toothed tiger comes at you, you're going to either fight it or run away. So cortisol is extremely important at that point. What it does is it's going to tense up my muscles and gets me ready to fight. It raises my blood pressure, it increases my glucose so that I have all the energy that I need to be able to fight this saber-toothed tiger. And then it makes me hyper-focused on that situation so I can really go at it the way I need to. So it's a really good thing. Unfortunately, what we see is more chronically high levels of cortisol, right? So cortisol is released when we're stressed. Cortisol is released even when we experience disappointment. And cortisol, chronic levels of cortisol, high cortisol levels, they cause a raise in inflammation, increase our blood pressure. Now we see we're not able to sleep at night, right, because we're thinking of a million things. We see an increase in our blood sugar now because we have this increased level of cortisol chronically. And then the next slide also talks about our negativity bias. Our brain is pretty much likes to look at the negative things. So let's say that your boss told you this afternoon, say, hey, come on in my office. I want to talk to you. We've got about 5 things that you've been doing really well. You know, one area we need to improve on. Let's make an appointment for first thing Monday morning, and we'll focus on all these things and have a discussion. Well, most likely, most of us are probably going to be attracted to that one thing I did wrong. Like, oh, what is that? What did I say? Did I do, did I fail in a project that I did? You know, is somebody saying something about me? So we're hyper-focused on the negative. We totally forgot that she told us that we did 5 things great. You know, I did 5 things well, but I'm going to really focus on that one thing. So our brain is really attracted to that negative. We dwell on it. We ruminate it, right? We even start to scan the world for negative. So unfortunately, you know, maybe then when you go out to eat, we might be looking at what's wrong versus what's right. And we maybe don't notice all of the good things going around us because we tend to be focused on negative. That's just the way our brain works. In his book, The Happiness Advantage, Sean Aker talks about an example of a tax auditor, you know, who's constantly looking for mistakes during the workday. While he was having a really difficult time, having a difficult marriage, and was kind of sharing some of the things. And what he decided to do was start a spreadsheet, which we might relate to, that listed all the mistakes his family had made in the past 6 months. It was planning to share that. So again, you know, he's so hyper-focused on looking for mistakes because it's part of his job that he actually started to look for mistakes in his life as well. And then on the next slide, we talk about what all the negative influences are in and around us, right? So if you would turn on the television and we're watching the news in the evenings, most often, if not almost always, they're leading with a negative story. And that's because the producers know that. You know, they know that our human brain's attracted to it, and our human brain really wants to carefully watch whatever that negative story is. So we definitely are attracted to negative media. And then I think of social media as well. So maybe a lot of you don't look at social media a whole lot, but we do know that younger generations are looking at more social media, whether it's their Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever. But there's a lot of times when we look at that social media, we start to think to ourselves and start to compare, right? So we say, oh gosh, you know, why doesn't my family post for pictures like that? Everybody looks great in this photo. Or, you know, wow, did they have to buy all those new outfits just to take this photo? They must make more money than I do. Or how do they get to go on all these vacations, right? So we start to make those comparisons. And if you've heard that aphorism, that comparison is the thief of joy, right? So it puts us in a sense, and actually our brain senses that we're actually in a state of weakness. And guess what? Because of that, our brain's going to release cortisol. So that's part of it as well, those negative influences. And then I really don't even have to say a whole lot about the negative influences we have in our climate today. So on the next slide, you'll see that we really need to think about and really start to practice the positive. So let's get into that. The next slide talks about, first of all, before I talk, is what positive psychology is not. So Diane's not saying, hey, you know, everything in my life is rainbows and unicorns and butterflies and, you know, everything is great. You know, I'm always thinking positive. That's definitely not it. It's not that tradition. It's not a replacement for any kind of traditional psychology. It's not about just kind of slapping on a smile on my face and thinking I'm happy all the time and trying to pretend I'm happy all the time. And it's not about sticking my head in the sand either or putting blinders on and really not looking at all that's around me. And I like this quote on the next page here, because when we talk about, on the next slide, when we talk about, you know, again, that the first definition about that meaning, a life of meaning and purpose, a meaningful life really does encompass all the disappointments and loss, right? And those difficult experiences can really help us. They help us really hone in on our core values. They motivate us to make the change we desire. They really make those happier moments even more joyous and more special. So that next slide talks about, I would say, probably the biggest shift in positive psychology, and that's going to be our perspective. If we can change our perspective, we can really start to see those shifts toward better well-being and better quality of life. So perspective is just how we look at things, right? So glass is half empty, the glass is half full. But a lot of times it's based on maybe a previous experience that we've had, our perception. So we might have had something went on that, affects our perspective. And then we often associate some type of emotion along with it. So let me give you an example. If today in the mail you receive something from the DMV, most of you will have you're going to look at that in some way. So I'll give you my experience, right? So when I think that I have to go to the DMV, my perception is that it's a negative event for me, right? So it's based on past experiences I've had where, I've forgotten a checkbook when I get up to the counter. I've had to wait more than 2 hours before at the DMV. When I get to the counter, the individuals who are waiting on me really I don't think they felt purpose in their job. So they really didn't interact in a pleasant way. So now I've attached my negative attitude, right? So I'm already thinking negative. I'm begrudgingly think, oh, great, I have to go to the DMV. I don't like the DMV. So I have already changed everything and my perspective is already there, right? So what can I do? So by just making some little changes on our perspective, I can look back and I can think, all right, Diane, really, was every single experience negative? No, of course not. Many times I walk in and out of the DMV. I've had very pleasant individuals there. It's not taking me very long. So I can start to think of that, my perception, start to make that small change. I also don't have to attach any type of negative feeling toward it. It is what it is, right? I have to go to the DMV. And so now when I drive to the DMV, instead of just, dreading it or even dreading it from the morning on, like, oh, I have to go to the DMV at lunchtime, try to make it, in time for work or whatever it might be. Now I can just go there pleasantly and not have to think about it in a negative light. So I'm going to ask you on the next slide, you're going to have a question here that's going to ask you if I just want you to maybe put in the chat feature, and I have my helpers there, just chat what makes you happy. So just an open-ended question here. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds, and then I'd like to hear some of the responses as they come in. How are we doing there?
And we got all kinds of good stuff coming in. A lot of family, clean house, time outdoors, pets, vacations, family and friends, tough workouts, kids not fighting, stability, sunshine, sports, Dr. Pepper.
Love it. That's great. That's great. All right.
Hold on. Time for myself is another big one.
What was that one?
Time for myself.
Time for myself. Awesome. Yep. All those things that make us happy. So hopefully just thinking about made you happy again, right? So you thought about when you're going to drink your Dr. Pepper, whatever it may be. So the next slide talks about all those positive emotions. So when you thought about that experience or what made you happy, you probably felt that joy, but also some other great feelings like serenity, like time for yourself. You might have just felt really like, this just feels so good. You weren't like, woohoo, joyous, but you're like, yes, this just feels great. I heard a lot of maybe pride or inspiration or about family. I heard love toward our family, being outdoors, things you like, things you're interested in. All of these positive emotions really make a richer picture of what happiness really is. So on the next slide, this is just kind of looking at happiness and what contributes to happiness. So I laugh because I'm kind of like, I'm kind of afraid to show this because I don't want some of you to think, well, I'm just genetically predisposed not to be happy. But I do think, and we probably all know those individuals in our lives, in our social circles, in our families, that just tend to be naturally optimistic, right? They're pretty positive, they're content, we like being around them, they really exude that positiveness. And so genetics does play a factor in our determinant of how happy that we are. But I would have to say that it was hard for me to kind of put in that 50% because it's only up to 50%. So really everybody's very individual, and it could be as low as 20% of our genetics determining our happiness up to about 50%. So you might be a lot less than that. So if you feel that oh, genetically, I'm just maybe not necessarily always that person that's the glass is half full. That's okay. So we could see only 10% are attributed to our circumstances, like, whether I'm rich or poor, healthy or unhealthy, married, divorced. But that definitely leaves 40% or more within my power to change. And I'll have full disclosure here. So I'm not always the glass is half full kind of person. So I have to think about it. I have to really apply a lot of the things we're going to talk about. And like that next slide says, it's asked, do you have that growth mindset? So do you believe that you can improve? Because those of us who believe that we can, we believe that there's that nice payoff that we saw, and we believe we can really make a change, we're going to probably work harder at it. So hopefully you have that growth mindset within you. The next slide just talks about sometimes what we tend to do is we think, well, as soon as I blank, then I'll be happy, right? So as soon as I get that promotion, or as soon as I find that right partner, as soon as I win the lottery, pass a test, whatever it may be, we're always filling that in, right? But actually, authentic happiness, we're thinking backward if you're thinking that. So that's backward thinking if you think it's as soon as I blank, then I'll be happy. It's really the other way around. So we want to be happy first and see those benefits that come from being happy. And it's not the opposite. Those events caused my happiness. In fact, according to Dr. Dan Gilbert, we do tend to have this bias that they kind of, have that we think that hedonic impact is going to have a huge a bias or a huge event in our lives. But he found that it really has much less impact than we expect it to have. So something like winning the lottery or getting that promotion. In fact, his research found that if the event occurred more than 3 months ago, it doesn't have that much of an impact. So I thought that was very interesting as well. So on the next slide, it is possible to choose a path of happiness sometimes, right? It's both a choice and not a choice. If you're not in a happy situation or a situation that gives you joy or serenity or anything like that, that's okay. It doesn't mean that, I got to really put on a face of happiness. But we can do a couple things, right? So maybe we can fix our thoughts on maybe a past experience that made you happy. Or we can maybe find, that silver lining in our present circumstance, right? I see that silver lining theme kind of in articles and with clients, et cetera. So I kind of like that thought. So let's say, you get done the webinar, you go back into your inbox and you see this huge project and someone, and I need it by 4 o'clock today. So of course, that's not going to be woohoo, most of us at least. We're probably not going to have all those great positive emotions about that. But what we can do is we can already recognize it as number one, right? But we can kind of think, well, this has happened to me before. And when I take it, little by little, I'm able to kind of get through it. So I have the resources I need to actually do this project and complete the project as requested. Or maybe that's when you look back and say, this has happened to me before. I know that I can call on maybe a coworker, or they can help me out, whatever it might be. So that's how you could kind of use your past experience. And then you can just find the silver lining in what you have, right? So, well, at least I didn't give it to you at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So that's kind of what, how we can kind of start to practice that happiness and choose that happiness even when we don't always feel that way. So and the next one shows a photo of Dr. Sean Achor. And those of you who maybe have seen his TED Talk, it's like one of the most watched TED Talks ever. And so it's a great one. I have a link to it for you if you're interested. This was done in May of 2011, but he talks about authentic happiness. And one of the things he uses as his illustration is he talks about your lens. So maybe thinking about it that way, right? You're changing your lens. And he even goes as far as kind of calling it putting on rose-colored glasses. So that not meaning that you have glasses where you have blinders on the side, that you can't see all the negative, but that you're actually you're seeking out the positive. And then on the next slide, it talks about dopamine. That's that feel-good neurotransmitter, right? And that's released when we are authentically happy, when we have all those positive emotions. And the great thing about dopamine is it really starts to turn on those learning centers in our brain. So now we're more thoughtful, we're more creative, We're able to organize new information better, right? We're making those new neural connections in our brain. So we're thinking quicker. We're more skilled at problem solving. So you're actually rewiring our brain, which is just incredible. And when I think about that, just think about the time when you started this webinar till the end of the webinar, your brain has changed. You've changed your brain. And on the next slide, it talks about some of the different things that can help create and help rewire our brains. And we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about gratitude. We'll talk a little bit about journaling, random acts of kindness, but don't forget exercise. And I love it that a couple of you said that's what makes you happy, a great workout or being outdoors and getting out and walking, whatever it might be. I don't know about you, but I find my best problem solving times, right? When I'm out walking, it's that's great. I've got all these solutions, and that's dopamine at work. So make sure you're getting that exercise at least 150 minutes a week. And then meditation, right? So if your perception is that meditation is still sitting in the middle of the floor, cross-legged and chanting, that may be meditation for some, but it doesn't have to be that way for you, right? So meditation could be just, getting out, enjoying that outdoors, taking a nice stroll, even just closing your eyes for a bit, or how about taking a nice deep breath in and out. Right? So all that does is it just keeps you in the here and now, keeps us mindful. And my colleague in our MMA Minneapolis office and I did a nice podcast with Andrew, so you can check it out. We talked a little bit more about meditation. Okay, so next slide. How do we apply this all, right? So if you've read John Gordon's book, The Positive Dog, he has a great illustration. So it talks about an individual who went to a wise person and said, I have these two dogs who are constantly fighting inside of me. He said, one dog is positive, optimistic, he's happy-go-lucky and hopeful. The other dog is negative and mad and sad and pessimistic. He said, these two dogs are constantly fighting each other. And he said, and you know what? I just am afraid. I don't know who's going to win. And the wise person looked at him and said, well, I know who's going to win. It's going to be the one you feed the most, right? So how do we feed the positive dog? How do we do that? And a lot of it is listening to yourself and reminding yourself of those positive experiences you have and really absorb it. Really take that all in. Spend time thinking about it. Spend time dwelling on it. Start to link the positive with maybe something that your natural heuristics kind of brought you to a negative, like me in the DMV, right? So stay strong, keeping that, looking for those opportunities to be happy, remembering that we really want to increase our time that we're authentically happy, not just the hedonistic happiness, right? That all comes and goes, and it's most likely going to go at some point, but the things that can sustain us. So on the next slide, it talks about activities and interventions. And these were actual interventions and activities that were from studies, evidence-based studies, that Tyler Vanderweel and his colleagues in Harvard have looked at. And they looked at what did contribute to positivity. And they found that gratitude was one of the main things. So gratitude, meaning what's good in the past or the present, is what they looked at. And really few things are really as integral to our well-being as gratitude. So consistently grateful people, they're more energetic, more emotionally intelligent, forgiving, less likely to be depressed, anxious, or lonely. So the studies, they looked at whether individuals were writing something that they were grateful for every day, like writing down 3 things. That's Dr. Marty Seligman's big thing, write down 3 things that you're grateful for every night. Or if individuals did it maybe once a week and wrote down 5 things, right? It didn't necessarily matter as much. Of course, the more we do it, the more we're familiar, the more practice we have at it. But those that did write things down, what made them grateful, did have higher levels of happiness, lower levels of depression, fewer physical symptoms. They found that they had lower levels of cellular inflammation, greater resilience, better sleep. So all of those great benefits. And they determined that gratitude in the research really does a couple of things. One of it is that it really helps to disconnect us, at least for that moment, right, from all those toxic negative emotions that we have and all that ruminating that we do that accompanies them. So for that moment, when I'm writing down what I'm grateful for, it's really shifting my attention. Could have not such a great day, but if I'm writing down what went well in my day and what I was grateful for, and maybe when I look back at that day, it'll help me remember and shift my attention again more on the positive, and our focus is more on those positive emotions. Gratitude also helps by helping us reduce materialism, right? The pursuit of things. It makes us more content. We talked about that, more serenity, that type of thing. It can help to counteract that hedonic adaptation. So, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I can flip on a switch and electricity, my light comes on, right? And we take those things for granted all the time. We just get used to them. But that grateful practice really helps us to remember all the things that we have and makes us really feel more and more grateful for them. I have a gratitude app on my phone, and I had to go through that exercise. You know, it was real quick. What kinds of things do I take for granted and why I'm thankful for them? But you all know, if you were out with, if the water company called and said your water's going to be off for 2 hours, it's like all of a sudden I'm like incredibly thirsty, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I use water so much, or your power goes out, or whatever it may be. So we do take a lot of things for granted. So that gratitude exercise really helps us remember all of that. Once we start a gratitude practice, then it also trains our brain to be more in tune with things around us that we're more grateful for, right? So that even helps out. And they even found that one of the studies asked individuals to write a letter of gratitude to a specific person and mail that letter off. And then they asked another group, write a letter to a specific person, but they didn't even mail the letter. And they found still that individuals who just by doing that exercise found out that they were more satisfied with life just from completing that exercise. So the next slide just kind of shows you how deep and how extended gratitude can be in our lives and what all it can do, how it affects our emotions, of course, right? So we're going to have those happy memories, or be more resilient. People want to be around you if you're more thankful for things and have more gratitude. So, it's affecting our social well-being. It's affecting your career. You're more gratitude, you're more positive. Again, you're probably going to be a better manager. Affects our health, our physical health, and then of course how it can affect our personality, and all kind of goes into that whole realm of happiness. All right, so the next slide, after gratitude, the researchers also looked at savoring, and savoring is looking at what's good in your present. So what's happening right now? So kind of similar to mindfulness, right? You're really attending to the now in your current situation. But what you really want to do is start to really heighten your awareness of the positive. So when you are outside enjoying it, use all of your senses, not only just what you see, but what am I hearing? How do my feet sound when they're hitting the pavement? Or, what does the wind feel like on my face? So remembering all of that and really savoring it in and all of the positive experiences that you have. And then there is what's called the doubler effect. And that says that think of a positive experience that you've had in the last 24 hours, and then bullet point every detail. So, for me, I love it when I can, early morning, I'm taking the dog out, and, the sun's just on the horizon, and the owl in the tree across the street hoots. We just love it. I just love hearing it. So I would go and I would write every little detail kind of in a bullet point. So, put my shoes on, grabbed my coat, zipped up my coat. So all the details. And what that exercise does is that actually our brain can't differentiate between what we just visualized and that actual positive experience that we had. So we're basically just doubling that positive experience. So I can do that in the middle of the afternoon when the owl is sleeping or whatever, and my brain feels that satisfaction of those positive emotions again. So that's what savoring is. And then imagining one's possible self. So that's really just writing out your personal goals, your plans, your actions, right? Those SMART goals, but really looking at what your life would be like in the future. Of course, as much as you can be on the positive end, like if things really went well, what would that life look like? in the next couple slides, I just kind of wanted to share, if you haven't done that or aren't sure, like, well, I'm not really sure. I know I should look at my plans and goals for maybe the next 5 years, but I don't even know where to start. I love this little wheel of life exercise. So the next slide kind of illustrates what you would do. You're basically just doing 5 concentric circles, and you're dividing them up evenly into either 6, or this example is 8 different sections. You're labeling it 0 in the middle to 5 on the outside. And then at each spoke, you'll see on the next slide the example. So each spoke, you're going to write out or insert roles you play in life. So just brainstorm, 6 to 8 dimensions in your life that's important to you. So it might be the roles you play, like husband and wife, father, mother, manager, team member, sports player, whatever it might be. And then, or it could be a combination of that in some areas of life that are important to you, like your artistic expression, creativity, career, education, family, friends, all of that. So you can see the example here. And what you'll do is the red line is what you want to do is ask yourself the amount of attention you're devoting to that area currently. And so that's what the red line is. So in this case, I'll just use healthy eating as an example. So this individual decided that's an important dimension of their life, but right now they're being honest, they're not paying any attention to that. So that's the red line. So then you can kind of connect it. It gives a nice little pretty chart there. But then the blue line would be what you would do is you would consider your ideal level of area in your life. So ideally where that individual wants to be with all of these aspects. So for maybe in this case, this individual was talking with their primary care provider, and he or she told them, well, your cholesterol is getting high, your glucose is up, so you really should focus more on healthy eating. So they've kind of determined that that's really something I want to spend some time on. So that's why they scored it at a 5. Now you'll notice that everything doesn't have to be scored at a 5. That doesn't really mean it isn't necessarily the case. So in this case, this individual maybe felt like they were spending a lot of time on career, so they gave it a 5, but they thought, I can kind of feel like I can rest for a little bit. And obviously you would redo this exercise whenever you saw fit. But this just kind of helps you figure out where those gaps lie, where areas are opportunities for you to kind of focus on those areas. And then you can kind of develop that goal based on some of those aspects here. So just a little idea of what you can do. The next slide talks about character strengths, right? So it's so important that we identify our strengths or our virtues, and we know how to apply them. So at MMA St. Louis, all of our employees, we've gone through insights discovery. So maybe some of you are familiar with that. Everybody's kind of given a color. So I am green, by the way, if you know anything about that. So I know about myself. I know what I like. I know that I'm a good listener. I know I have empathy is one of the things I lead with. But I also know that when I'm in a meeting and someone asks for a decision right away, I know my strength enough to say, hey, that's a great idea. Let me think about it. Because I'm an individual, as a green individual, I'm one that I like to think about things, right? I don't like to make a really quick decision. I'm not good at it. At least I feel like I'm not good at it. So I like to think about it. But that empowers me to be able to tell that individual, hey, let me think about it, right? So it helps me in my strength, helps keep me happy instead of being stressed out like, oh my gosh, they want an answer from me right now. So here's some examples from the University of Pennsylvania. You can see they have some great character strength exercises that you can go through. So that's a link that I know you have the PDF for. The next slide talks about a couple other behavioral exercises that you can do, and that is acts of kindness, right? So whether it's weekly, over the course of several weeks, whatever, we just know that increases our happiness, our life satisfaction, makes us feel more engaged maybe in our community, less anxious, et cetera. And of course, we love that it has such a contagious effect, right? So if someone does something nice to you, you're more likely to do something nice to them or somebody else in return. And then volunteering, of course, great for providing those social connections, great and gives you that sense of purpose and, you're hopefully finding your purpose in your work, but purpose outside of your work as well is very important as well. And that's, in a sense, it's kind of like all these repeated acts of kindness. But we know people who volunteer are happier, they have more social activities and better physical and mental health. The next slide talks about there are some do-it-yourself activities, right? So I mentioned I have an app on my phone. So there's lots of apps you can put on your phone. Journaling, there's some great journals out there that actually are gratitude journals. So find things that work for you. Maybe for you it's a reminder that on your calendar reminder, hey, before things wrap up, I need to think about things I'm thankful for or grateful for. Maybe for you it's an exercise that you want to start in your family. So maybe every time you sit down for a meal together, everybody kind of goes around the table. Hey, what are you grateful for today? What happened today that was, you're grateful for? Whatever that is. So find out what works for you to kind of make it a habit for you. And then I do have counseling and therapy on there because I do want to acknowledge that many of us are experiencing a more high degree level of anxiety or depression or stress. We talked about it earlier as well. And you might need some of that social and professional support. And we just want you to know you're not alone. It's a very, very difficult time for a lot of individuals. And if you're feeling like, I just feel like there's this black cloud over me, I can't even see a silver lining anywhere in it, then I just want to encourage you to seek out maybe some professional support. You can start with your employee assistance program. It sounds like Missouri Society of CPAs also has some wonderful resources, so check out their webpage. But asking at your employer if they do have an employee assistance program or EAP, which can provide licensed counseling at no cost to you, and it's completely confidential. If you don't have those resources or you're unable to find them, please reach out to any of us here at either from Missouri Society of CPAs, or I will provide my contact information at the end, and I'm happy to help you link with some of those resources as well. So the next slide, this is from Dr. Marty Seligman. He has this PERMA model for well-being. So remember, well-being is part of that whole positive psychology. And this is kind of the framework he uses for helping us understand those foundations for well-being. And we have talked about positive emotions already. E for engagement, that's a little different than what we think of engaging, within our social circles. This engagement is that you're so engrossed in something that you actually lose track of time and you become completely absorbed in something you enjoy and something to excel at. So this is also a very important part of well-being. Some of you might have heard the term flow, right? That's what flow is. So you're totally in it, you love it, whether it's you're working out as hard as you can, you find that enjoyment, or you're involved in a spreadsheet that you just love and you just love doing that type of work, or maybe it's you're outside walking, whatever that is, that's your engagement, that's your flow. So that's another very important part of our developing that sense of well-being, to make sure we're truly engaged in something, right? Relationships, so important, having those meaningful, deep relationships is so vital to our well-being. We've talked kind of about that meaning, making sure we're dedicating ourselves to some type of cause or purpose, or we're finding that within our job, but maybe we're looking outside of ourselves to something that's bigger than ourselves as well. And then we all thrive when we're succeeding, when we're achieving our goals, when we're bettering ourselves. We have that drive. We really feel good when we have that. So those are a lot of these steps for well-being. Also can help us flourish as well. And this definition from Dr. Lynn Sutz on flourishing, kind of, again, you'll see common themes, right? Authentic, inner joy, happiness, looking at our passions. So flourishing is also a part, and I told you, I like that word, flourishing. So the next slide, you'll see that Harvard has actually been studying flourishing, and they actually have a human flourishing program where they are really, looking at mental and physical health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and relationships and financial stability. So it's a very, very quick 12-question questionnaire. You answer the questions from 0 to 10. Individuals just fill this out. But I wanted to share with you the next slide. And this is what they published last year in 2020. So from their flourishing program at Harvard, they've been studying it for a while. And you can see how things have really changed from the beginning of January 2020, so really a year ago today, all the way to the middle of the pandemic, and how that overall flourishing index really has changed. So we know that we are struggling. It is difficult, sometimes to see through that cloud that's kind of surrounding us. So that's why I really want to make sure that we all understand that, there is help available, and to make sure that you're getting appropriate help if need to be. So last couple slides, I just wanted to talk about positivity in the workplace, right? So maybe start out by writing about all the good things that you've done it maybe in your life, but what about your job? What are all the good things you have in your job? So we really want to train our brain to be more skilled at noticing the good in our big lives, but even in our little lives and jobs that we have. We know we know the negative part, right? If someone negative comes into a meeting, it kind of just sucks all the air out of everything. Well, it's the same thing. One positive person on a team can really have that ripple effect. I was always told when I go into a meeting, do I bring energy to the meeting or do I suck it out of the meeting? So thinking about that when we're interacting with our colleagues, et cetera. And if you are a leader, that you are role modeling all this from the top. So you're starting to look at your employers, and you're really starting to let them know that you believe in them, you believe in their potential, because once they sense that from you, and maybe you are actually saying it to them, then that's going to bring that potential in them to life, right? So, make sure that you are expressing the faith in your employees' skills, reminding them of their intelligence, of their perseverance, of their competency in the workplace. So really start role modeling that and really placing in them, what you believe them to be, and they will see that through. And it will just give them a breath of fresh air and help them to make sure and see that through to fruition. You might have seen some little positive to negative ratios out there. It's difficult to find some good research showing that it's exactly 3-to-1 positive to negative, but we do know that the more positive interactions, positive emotions that we can have over the negative one, that's going to be helpful. So remembering that when you're with your colleagues at work, or you're in your meetings or managers or whatever, always start with the positive, right? Try to get, and you might see that 3-to-1, 3 positive comments, experiences, or expressions to fend off every one negative. That's fine. I think that's great. It's probably bigger than that, right? So a lot of us, like I said, we just tend to, whatever reason, dwell on that negative. So just remember, more positive, more positive. Employees are happiest when they have that sense of autonomy, they feel competent in their job, they have all the resources, and when they can connect to others in the workplace, right? So I know a lot of your organizations are really leveraging all of the technologies that we have. But I see that my internet is back, but I just thought it'd be so difficult to kind of come out and then come back on again. So hopefully I'll get to see you some other time, or you'll get to see me. But that connection is so important. And if you're feeling a little bit like, I'm way out here all on my own, then reach out yourself. Don't wait for someone to reach out to you, making sure that we're connecting with others in the workplace. And then, in 2019, there was some data out from the USA Travel Association that said that 55% of Americans reported having unused vacation days in 2019. And yet, those of you who have been on a vacation before, usually those are the times we're citing that as that's when I get to relax, when I get to, reduce my stress. It helps me avoid burnout. So please make sure you take your vacation. And especially if you're that leader at the top, try to be a good role model. Last couple slides. I just wanted to show you again, there's some great resources out there. If you Google positive psychology, you'll find them. There's some great podcasts. So if you'd like to listen to podcasts, there's a happiness lab, signs of happiness, some other ones there. The next slide just talks about some different apps that you can find. I happen to like the gratitude app, but there's other apps out there as well. If you like to, you can set up reminders, and just as you go through some exercises to remind you to stay happy, to stay positive, and to keep being grateful. The next slide talks about some of those researchers that are in that positive psychology field. In case you wanted to look any of these up and do some research on your own, these are some of the different researchers that are out there, and that I look for a lot of them for a lot of their research and putting that presentation together. So I think my last slide just says thank you. Thank you so much for the time that you spent today on yourself, right? So for the time you spent today, hopefully thinking about ways you can be more positive, bringing that practice of gratefulness and savoring and really looking forward to your future today. And I hope this is really encouraging to you all. So I'm going to see if you have any questions and open it up at this time.
All right, and thank you, Diane. You've shared a lot of helpful information today, and I know I personally took a lot away from this. You know, in my house, every night at dinner, we do something called Story of the Day, where we go around our table and share something that we're grateful for that happened that day. And, you know, part of it's to get my children to talk, and the other part, now that I understand, it's actually helping our well-being. So thank you for sharing that. Also, a lot of great comments on the example with the wheel with all the spokes. So thank you for sharing that. We do just have a few questions from the group that I wanted to address fairly quickly. We have one attendee that has had a much harder time being able to focus and being as productive as they used to be before the craziness of 2020. But the expectations from superiors have not changed despite everything going on. They're expected to accomplish all the work as usual and spend the same amount of time, if not faster than before. Do you have any suggestions on how they can stay positive under this kind of pressure?
Yeah, so that's great. And thank you for the question too. It's very, very difficult, right? So not only, I mean, we kind of just think about without the pandemic, how difficult it was sometimes just to manage through things. And now we have all the pandemic and we have the thoughts of, you know, we're so concerned about the health and well-being of ourselves, our families, et cetera. So it is very, very difficult. I would just suggest a couple of things. Number one is start and some type of meditation, something. What it does is it just gets you away from all of the stuff, all the negative influences that we hear and see every day, to make you focus just on yourself and have that kind of positive practice on a regular basis. So making sure you're doing something regular. And even when you kind of feel it creeping in, so it's so good for you to know when you have those triggers, what they are, to make sure you're taking some time away, taking that big deep breath, thinking about how you've gotten through this before, what you have in front of you, and then also making sure that you know what your character strengths are, et cetera, and be empowered by that, so that if you do need to have conversations with individuals within the organization or coworkers or whatever it may be, you know, you can hopefully let them, you know, at least express some of your concerns that you have. But I think it starts with just getting yourself focused on just the moment, that meditation, if you will, and then always thinking about, well, what can I look for? I know everything's negative, but where can I find those silver linings in everything that I'm doing, and really pull that in? And hopefully, again, it's a practice, right? So it's just like exercise, et cetera, right? We can't go out and just, you know, do one walk or one jog and then, you know, be totally great and lose 15 pounds. So it does take practice, but I hear you. I know it's very difficult. I, a long time ago, turned off the evening news. I don't watch the evening news. You know, again, do what you need to do to kind of put those boundaries in place for you in regards to everything going on, so that's contributing to some of the stress and some of the anxiety that you have as well. And again, it's really EAPs or employee assistance programs, licensed psychologists, we don't want you to get to a point, they don't want you to be a point where, you know, it's so difficult that you can't get out of bed. We want you to get to talking about it sooner and finding some of those strategies that work for you too.
Great, thank you. That's some great advice. I'm scrolling through the chat again right now. A lot of positive feedback. I know you're unable to see all that, but tons of great programs. So thank you again for all of that. I do not see any more questions coming through right now. So in the interest of time, we can go ahead and wrap up the program for today. Diane, I want to thank you one more time for sharing all of your thoughts with us today. I really do appreciate it. I encourage all of you to continue to check out our website for additional information and upcoming learning opportunities. I hope that you all really enjoyed the program today and are able to put what you learned into action. I hope all of you have a great weekend, and we hope to see you again for the next one. Diane, thank you again, and we will see you all soon.